Welcome to the Lewiston City Council work session. I'll wait for Councilor Foreman to take your seat. This is a work session of December 2nd, 2024. We'll call this meeting to order. First order of business is our Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us in saying the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next item of business is citizen comments. It's an opportunity for citizens to address the council on agenda items or other items they wish to bring to the attention of the council. Citizens are encouraged to discuss operational issues in advance with the mayor. And in consideration of others wishing to speak, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. So we have a microphone over here, and we have 3 more up in the ceiling. So if anybody wants to come up and make some comments, please speak clearly so we can hear and people that might be at home watching can hear.
Bill Firstanaw, 1011 Prospect Avenue. Couple of items on your agenda tonight of importance, but they're kind of in conflict with each other. Letter A, Main Street update. Good effort to make the town more inviting and more livable, attractive. Item B, the fact that you're even considering allowing shipping containers to clutter up neighborhoods is going in the wrong direction. So just city staff issued a menu or a memo with, I don't know, 3 or 4 different options they're hoping that, you can get going on. Option number 1 is the obvious one. Take no action, leave it as it is. No junk in residential neighborhoods. No need for even direction to the staff. It's on the books. Start enforcing it tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Penny Barbie, 806 26th Street, Lewiston. Last time we had this meeting about the shipping containers, I was under the impression there are at least 200 of them. It's on the code right now that they're not supposed to be there. So why did we get to the point of having that many? It makes no sense to me by saying, well, we are not enforcing it because we may change it. Well, code is law. Does that mean we may change a stoplight so I don't have to stop there because sometime in the future we may change it? That doesn't make any sense. And you want a beautiful city, you want a clean city, you want the residents to take responsibility and pride in their homes, to maintain their tax value, to maintain their all over property value. And then right down the street, there's a shipping container. It's not cute, it's not pretty, and a lot of us just don't like it. And when you spoke of it last time, I heard the words Normal Hill a lot. Normal Hill is not the only neighborhood. You folks were elected to serve the entire city of Lewiston. The entire city pays taxes. And those of us that don't live in Normal Hill don't want those shipping containers next door to us either. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and move on. These are discussion items. And please note that identifying an item as an action item does not require the city council to vote on that item. Our first order of business is the final Main Street update. It's a final update regarding the Main Street Reimagine Downtown Lewiston project from Welch Comer and Associates. And this is an action item. Director Johnson.
In the interest of time, I don't think I have any introduction. You probably know Phil by now from Welch Comer, who's going to give you your final update on the Main Street project, and we'll hear for discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor, Acting Mayor, and council members. Okay, so you guys have seen this process flow chart or the funnel before and where we're at in it. We're down towards the bottom here, December 2nd. We do show on this list that there was potential going to be a December 23rd council meeting. Not sure if we'll come back and make a presentation for that or not. Right now, this is the final. But if we need to come back for another one, we certainly will. But we've worked through each one of those steps. The big last thing we've been working on over the last several weeks is the final concepts and the estimated costs, and that's what we're going to get into in some detail today. Just to refresh everybody's memory on the project limits, what you see in tan there are the project limits, the areas where there would be proposed for improvements. The black line is just the historic downtown corridor boundary that we had in a drawing. We kind of keep carrying it forward. So those are the project limits. I wanted to just hit some high points to refresh council's memory about the feedback and the kind of the takeaways from the preliminary phase of this project as we were moving through the design phase, preliminary design phase, the public engagement, receiving feedback. The big thing, and I know we probably might have beat this horse to death, but just to refresh everybody's memory, the impetus of this is a utility project. And on that upper left-hand side, you see the cross-section of the street. When you start to replace deep utilities or you replace multiple utilities in a street cross-section, you end up tearing up all the surface improvements because that's just the most efficient way when you're doing multiple utilities. If you're doing a single utility, you could cut and patch, unless it's a deep one like the sewer, you still end up digging up a lot of it. In that plan view along the bottom of the screen, that gives you an idea of the extent of the surface removal, the asphalt and sidewalks that would be removed. So you do those two things, you end up tearing up a lot of the streets. The most efficient way to do that is with one big project. And in this particular case, to do one big project, you would need to go borrow a portion of the funding, which is that upper right-hand graph that you see up there, that you guys have seen that before. And that was just an analysis. If you bond and build under your current financing that you have available in your current budgeting, you would be able to go bond for some money, pay for it with your current revenue without increasing taxes. If you were to take the approach of save and build, you probably couldn't accomplish this problem. You couldn't accomplish this project because what happens is even though you're saving money and you're generating interest off of those savings, construction inflation will outpace your savings rate. Because if construction inflation is at 6 or 8% and you're saving at 4 or 5%, you're never going to get there. So that's just a refresher on those two items. I'm glad to take questions too as we go if you guys want to have any questions for me. Just a couple images here. You're going to go dig up all the streets in order to replace the utilities. So how do we put the streets back? Two-way traffic was considered or was kind of advanced from Main Street. That was from preliminary studies. We looked at it as well as on D Street. Feedback we got from the community was, and the downtown business and property owners was very positive on two-way traffic. You need a couple of roundabouts, 3 roundabouts at First and D and Main Street. Snake River Drive, that's in the upper right-hand corner. Bottom right-hand corner shows the two-way configuration on Main Street, still maintain parallel parking. Because you're going to two-way traffic, that little segment of 3rd Street, you don't really need for a part of your street network, so that can go away. By making it go away, you don't have to replace 2 signals. So there's a couple $1 million in savings because you don't need the signals to rebuild them, and you also don't have the cost of continually maintaining them. And in that bottom left-hand corner is just an image down by 11th Street that right-of-way is so wide down there, it gives you the opportunity to put in angled parking on both sides, as well as put a little boulevard down the middle, which really creates that traffic calming element for your downtown. And when you're trying to convert from vehicle-centric to pedestrian-centric, those types of elements really help because it slows people down and changes the vibe of that part of your community. Just a couple more images. When you're, again, having the opportunity to restore the surface of your downtown, how do you restore it? That upper left-hand picture is just the 3rd Street Plaza. Bottom left-hand picture is of the potential to make 6th Street a festival street. And that's just a street where there's no curbs, it's all one plane. It maintains itself as a street most of the time, but when you want to have a farmer's market there, it's easy to close down and you can use the entire width of it without having the curb in the way to disrupt people moving through. So those are very popular in cities these days because they're very multifunctional. Upper right-hand corner is actually at 3rd and D. And that's a speed table, which again promotes pedestrian movement, slows the traffic down a little bit, creates traffic calming. And at the bottom right is that section of D Street looking west. And the opportunity, again, with the width of the corridor there, to put a shared use path in. So those are some of the other features that came out of that preliminary design process. We presented them to the community, to the business, property owners, steering committee, and those ideas were responded to and modified as we move forward. And these are kind of the final images that show the design, preliminary design. So how would the project get constructed? And this was part of our scope of work, because it's one thing to show, put together a preliminary design of underground utilities, surface improvements, but it's another thing to actually figure out how does that work get completed, because that really drives the estimated cost of a project. And if you think about this in extremes, if you ask a contractor, hey, we got all this improvement to do in downtown, we got to dig up all the utilities, then we need to restore the surfaces, the sidewalk and the streets. What's the most cost-effective way to do it? And it would be block it off at 11th Street, block it off at 1st Street, and let me have the entire corridor and have no people in there and no vehicles, and I'll build it very cost-effectively. That would be the cheapest way to do it. You would run all your businesses out of business because there's no way to get there. So that's not a feasible way to do a project. So you need to strike this balance. We went through and worked through a couple of different scenarios, and the balance that we have found is the first phase of the project would be to convert to two-way. And so the areas that you see in red there are the areas that would need to be done in order to convert Main Street and D Street to two-way. So you really haven't done any improvements in between. You've just converted to two-way traffic. And that, you guys probably instantly spins up in your head, oh, that makes sense, because when you close down Main Street, you can now move two-way traffic to D Street, people going in both directions. And you can also provide pedestrian accessibility onto Main Street so folks can get to businesses. And I'll show you a little plan of that here in a second. So
This phase, or the two-way conversion first phase, does that include the underground infrastructure updates?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's the whole,
Yes, and that's an excellent point particularly on 1st Street from Snake River Drive over to D. As you guys know, there's a very large and deep sewer there that needs to be replaced. That is you'll see the cost estimate on here in a little bit. That's a major endeavor. And so it kind of segues me into this. This is a traffic control type of scenario that shows how you would go in and shut down D Street and 1st Street. So all the traffic would have to be off of that for a period of time. Because when you're replacing that sewer, it's so deep and it's so large that you're digging up, almost building face to building face just to get that thing in there. It's going from a 24-inch to a 36-inch sewer, and I want to say it's close to 20 feet deep there. So you can imagine that section of the world being closed, but the way that since you converted to two-way traffic, you can still move vehicles through there. In the 1st Street, Main Street area where the roundabouts were proposed for, that would be very congested during construction because you're channelizing people through there with temporary traffic control. But yes, all the utilities would be replaced in there. The signal at 9th and D would be removed because it's no longer needed. The signal at 9th and Main would be reconfigured. 11th Street at Main would be reconfigured into a stop-controlled intersection. And then the other areas, like I said, on D Street would be closed. So that underground utility construction could happen. Phase 2 is just everything else. And so when you start, this is kind of broadly shown, it's super difficult to dictate to a contractor how to execute their work specifically block by block, because each contractor does things a little bit differently. For purposes of estimating this project, we had to choose a methodology. And so for instance, you could go in and say, the contractor may say, I want to close 2 blocks, say 3rd to 5th, and do all that work in there, but I'll do that in a very short period of time, which could be great. If the contractor says, I want to do 3rd to 5th, and it's a very long period of time, that increases the impact on businesses. What I'm going to show you here is an example of a typical closure of a single block. So this shows from 3rd to 5th here. And you can see that the entire block is closed, but the pedestrian circulation is maintained in this. So the red zone is, no one can access that, but you can still get to the businesses. The big point here is that you can always access the business. Parking will obviously be up on D Street. Maybe in this scenario, you could be able to park between 5th and 9th Street and walk over to get to a business between 3rd and 5th. We have to pick a particular traffic control plan in order to estimate the cost, because again, it drives the unit pricing on things. So this is the basis of our cost estimate that I'm going to show you here in a second. There's also the potential that there could be simultaneous operations on this project. So you could be working, perhaps, a contractor may say, hey, can I work on between 3rd and 5th and 9th and 11th at the same time? That becomes a much more complicated traffic control program, because we would still be wanting to easily move cars through the open areas and also pedestrians from the parking lots or parking along the streets into the areas where the streets are closed. So that's just the background on how the basis of our cost estimating. The sequence of construction, I just wanted to hit this briefly to, again, kind of in your mind's eye to understand how the project would move forward. The contractors go in and a lot of times they'll leave some of the hard surfacing instead of tearing it all up, particularly on the sidewalks, because they're going to use those sidewalks for pedestrian access to the business. But they may go in and rip out curb face to curb face. First thing they're going to do is the sewer, because it's the deepest. As they move up, they'll do the water, storm sewer, curb and gutter, the sidewalk, the roadway, and the landscaping. But within that, there's all kinds of minor operations that occur. A lot of times, the last thing they'll do is rip out the sidewalks in front of the buildings and then quickly put those back in order to reestablish access to the businesses. Sometimes they'll rip those out, put gravel back in order to have an ADA accessible access to the businesses. It becomes compacted. Sometimes they put mag chloride on them. Sometimes we tell them to put mag chloride on it. The mag chloride helps bind the crushed rock together, so it makes kind of a durable surface. It's what you see on a lot of county roads for dust control. Okay, so getting into the costs, here comes the money, so brace yourself. Big number on the bottom there, you see that number. The total estimated project cost is $37.7 million. And that is complete project costs, including a 15% contingency. The cost, in order to make it digestible for all of us, we've broken it out block by block. So you can see each one of those segments of the project and the estimated project cost. Part of the reason we do that is so council can look in and say, okay, we see this, and where are alternatives? Where are some pieces, if we wanted to pull something out, where could we pull something out? So for instance, if you said, hey, this $9 million in phase one, that's kind of a big number, can we pull something out of there? Well, not really, because that has the big sewer project in it, you know, the big First Street sewer, it has the roundabouts in it that you need for two-way traffic. Probably not a lot of opportunity to scale that back. If we look over at Sixth Street, where you see new Sixth Street, you see there's $2.3 million in there. And that has a festival street in it, which has pavers in it. And those pavers are very expensive because they have what's called a rat slab underneath them. So you essentially go in and you pour a concrete slab, you put pavers, you put a sand layer and then pavers on top of that because it makes it very durable. It's also very expensive. But that's put in there at this point. And these are the things where when you kind of start digging into it, it's like, well, do we want to do it that way? Or do we want to put it, say, in concrete? Maybe we just put a colored concrete in there, which is much less cost. So that's the reason that this cost estimate is broken out in great detail. You guys will end up with this in a packet, so you can kind of go through and look at all these little details. I don't expect to have the discussion tonight, but I just wanted to give you guys an understanding of why it's broken out block by block like that. So we also break the cost estimates out between your different sources of revenue. So as you guys all know, you have enterprise funds, water, sewer. You don't have a stormwater utility, right? You do have a stormwater utility. So there's the stormwater utility as well. So we break those out separately from roadway improvements and streetscape improvements, because roadway is typically funded with tax revenue, same with streetscape. Water, sewer, storm are typically funded with enterprise funds. So breaking them out this way give Dustin and Luke opportunity to go through and say, okay, we see how much is in the water, how much is in the sewer, and how much is in the storm, the estimated costs. This shows you that image I was showing you earlier, and the reason I put this in here is there's a policy discussion that lies within these numbers, and I don't want to get super granular, but it's something that council will eventually have to weigh in on, because it's not our decision to make, but it's our decision to tee it up for you. And these costs, if you envision, let me just go back to this one here. If you envision in your mind's eye, when you go tear the sewer up, the sewer excavation could actually go probably curb face to curb face, you know, like 35 feet. You could tear up the entire road because you're moving excavators around and tearing things up. And you could say, you know what, the sewer project really is the one that tore up all this asphalt. So the sewer project should pay for all the asphalt. Or you could say, well, wait a second, the sewer, people that are using the sewer aren't driving on the roads. That's really should be paid for by our tax revenue. So the sewer fund should pay nothing to restore the roads. Tax revenue should pay to restore the roads. So there's kind of two ends of the spectrum there. For purposes of this discussion, what we did is we went in and assumed and said, we're going to take 10 feet of the road restoration and we're going to put that on the sewer. We're going to take 5 feet of the road restoration wide, put that on the water. We're going to take 5 feet of road restoration and put that on the stormwater utility. That's where are included in those numbers. At some point, Dustin or Luke may come back to you and say, gosh, we think that assumption is a little wrong one way or the other, because, and we would run different scenarios for you guys, but we have to have a starting point for council to look at. So this is just the starting point. Hopefully that's not getting too conflaborated. You guys might have heard this before because it's pretty common practice in utility management to allocate a certain amount of roadway restoration and sidewalk restoration to the enterprise utility. So those are the costs of the underground utilities. This is the estimated cost of the roadway reconstruction itself. So that $14.8 million is the roadway reconstruction, remembering that water, sewer, storm are paying for a portion of that. Then that right-hand column, the 7.6 million, that's the streetscape. So that's all the trees, understory lighting, benches, pavers along the sidewalk. You can see the new 6th Street is in there. So a lot of times that's where councils will go into and start to focus on that because, you know, they look at that and say, gosh, it's kind of just gingerbread and fanciness. Do we really need that? Some of it you could dial back, you know, new 6th Street, the illustration I gave earlier, you could dial some of that back. But if you were to say, gosh, we want to, you know, cut the landscaping in half, doesn't make a huge impact because if you think about landscaping, you still have to have an irrigation system, and whether you put in 5 bushes or 10 bushes, you still have the irrigation system, you still have the planter bed. So a lot of times there's not a ton of range of motion in some of the plantings and things like that. But things like pavers, there's lots of range of motions in those things. And then the last item here is the dry utilities. That is the trenching and excavation for dark fiber conduits, bearing and power on a portion of D Street. So you can see those big numbers on D Street. That includes bearing power through there, which is numbers we got out of worked with Avista to get those. And then on the far right, you see the estimated cost of the vault removal. And I've talked about this before. These are the vaults that have been identified as not necessary from the property owners. Some property owners are using their vaults. Some of them have utilities inside of them that can be relocated. We just estimated this number. This is based on a very cost-effective construction technique because you're gonna have the whole road torn up. So if you think about that vault facing the building, you can go in there, pull the front of it off, pull the sides off, build a CMU wall to block off the property owner's building, you know, so the penetrations that go into the property owner's basement, and then you backfill it with structural soils. So it's not like the ones that like Dustin and Luke have done with the ones that, you know, there's a hole in the sidewalk and you gotta go pump concrete into it, which is a very expensive way to do it. This is a very cost-effective way to do it, but it assumes that the street's torn up. So you gotta remember that footnote. So here's the summary that just runs through the phase 1, and it should, you know, the two-way conversion plus utilities, the remainder of Main Street, the remainder of D Street, and then the 6th Street Festival Street we pulled out separately just so you guys had an understanding of that number. So one of the next things that we will do once you have had an opportunity to think about this, probably provide feedback to Dustin and Luke, is to confirm the project scope. A lot of times when you have big numbers like that Festival Street, councils will look at those and say, gosh, I don't know if we really want to put that much money into it. You can either just completely strip it out of the project scope, or sometimes councils will say, let's put it in as an alternate. And, you know, we'll plan on bidding the project someday. If we get very good pricing, maybe it will fit within our budget. But it gives you opportunity to get true market pricing, because remember, we're doing our best to estimate. So that's what that first item there is. We would confirm the project scope with feedback from you all and Dustin and Luke. The next thing that would happen is establishing the enterprise funding available. Again, feedback from the city of the big numbers that we showed here. Whoops, here. You know, of that 4.4 million in water, how much is actually available over a period of time to potentially fund the project? Because by doing that, it allows us to calculate a bond amount. So take that 37.7 million, subtract off available funding, you calculate the bond amount. That number then is evaluated on a lot of different factors, interest rate, term, ability for the city to service that debt over time without increasing taxes. Identify potential grant funding sources that may be available over the next couple of years with the election. That's kind of in flux right now. And then I also threw on there, number 5, considering a local improvement district. A lot of times, again, councils will say, gosh, there's some core improvements here that really are the city's responsibility, but this other set of improvements, some of the fancy benches or things like that, maybe should be funded with a local improvement district by the property owners that are primarily benefiting from that. That gets to be a delicate dance with the property owners, obviously, because you guys are familiar, I'm sure, with LIDs, but it's important for us to make sure that you're aware that that's part of our scope of work, and we'll run scenarios as part of this so you can see what that impact might be. So then the last section here we'll talk about is schedule. Obviously, this is a super large project, and you can see that if it were to start in May of 25, assuming that there were a successful bond election, the first thing out of the gate would be getting the design done for phase 1 in order to be able to do the underground utilities and get the two-way conversion. There's probably a winter shutdown in there. And then design work would also be occurring towards the latter part of phase 1 on phase 2. And that project would probably be a separate bid, and it would probably continue through into 2027, 2028. So you can see it's a very long project. We started looking at scenarios of collapsing the schedule. But when you collapse the schedule, you start to end up with multiple work zones because just for the contractor to get that much done. And now you're really creating a massive amount of congestion in downtown. So this is a scenario that we think is doable and strikes that balance of cost effectiveness and not completely choking off business to downtown. That's all that I had, and I'm glad to answer any questions you guys might have.
Any questions?
Council President,
Yes.
have we looked at not doing the roundabouts and how much extra it would cost to do stoplights instead?
We have not, primarily because from a functional standpoint, I was trying to see if I had a good image to show you. From a functional standpoint, signals in that area, and I'll convert what my transportation engineer tells me to common folk speak, because that's what, I'm not a transportation engineer. It would create congestion in that because the cycle times, there's so many signals in there, the distance between the signals is so short that you would have to go green for a little bit, and then you've got to go to red or yellow, and then for a period of time, then to green. And during that time, with two signals so close like that, it creates a ton of congestion. One of the challenges, so from a functional standpoint, it's a bad idea. You'll end up backing traffic up onto the Blue Bridge and also down Snake River Avenue, and also back up onto First Street and Main Street. One of the challenges, and this might be where you're headed, is that's ITD right-of-way, and ITD has an aversion to roundabouts, which we're not sure why, because they're on state highway systems all over.
It isn't so.
Pardon me? I say it isn't so, yeah, you're right. So what we are going to do, Dustin and Luke have asked us to develop a configuration of that intersection in a signal format, which we will do, we'll estimate it. We are worried that ITD will look at it and go, yeah, do the signals because we don't like roundabouts. And even when you explain the functionality to them that says, look, that's going to create a negative traveling experience for people in Lewiston and Clarkston because the delay is going to go up, travel time is going to increase, safety is bad because, as you guys probably know, at intersections that have signals, the crashes are more damaging to humans because they're traumatic, big crashes. So there's lots of reasons that we would not be supportive of that from a kind of a scientific engineering standpoint. Long-winded answer, and I don't know if I captured it, but we're going to provide you guys that estimate. We think it's a bad idea.
So before we even go to bond, would we have their final answer if the ITD would let us do the roundabout?
It's an excellent question. We don't know.
What time in the game do we figure that out?
We're putting our packet together, and I think, and this might be a Dustin or Shannon question. It's gonna have to make its way up the food chain at ITD. And sometimes that stuff moves very quickly. We had a project up north, that had a roundabout in it, and the local district loved it. We concepted it, priced it out, got ready to head into design, and kind of on a Friday afternoon, we got a note that said, hey, we're not building a roundabout, build a pedestrian tunnel underneath. It's a long story, but it's another really, maybe I should be more careful with our words. We think it's a bad idea from a traveling public and from a safety standpoint, but they just won't look at it. And that came very quickly out of ITD. So it's hard to estimate.
Might not be a question that you have, but is there any reason why they're against them?
We don't know why.
Okay.
Yeah, as you guys know, there's one right across the river.
Right.
And there's lots of them in Washington State highway systems, tons on local roads. We're just not sure why.
Thank you.
Okay, well, our next step will be to start working with the city on answering some of these questions. And then if you guys have feedback, you want to dialogue with Dustin and his team to give us some of your observations and feelings, we want to make sure that we get that wrapped into it. We actually, all the preliminary plans, just to give you a concept, this is the plan set that has all the water, sewer, roadway, preliminary concepts, and it's the basis for the estimates. We just printed out a bunch of copies in the event council wanted to look at it, because sometimes when we send you an electronic version, it's really hard to look through, and some people like paper. So we brought a bunch of copies so you guys would be able to flip through it and take it. And I don't know if something will jump out at you or not, but we wanted to make sure that was in your hands for you to be able to look at.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Dustin, anything to add?
No, I think real quick, Phil hit most of everything. The one thing I would say is we're moving towards a bond number that we would take to the voters. Everything that we've built into our financial plan is that we will not ask for a bond that would impact property taxes. So it will be something that we have budgeted into the arterial reconstruction program, and I don't want to put everything into it. So we're going to be as cost conscious as we can. We don't want to build a project that doesn't achieve the goals that we needed. And I think Phil already hit a lot of this stuff is going to be, how much can we cover with enterprise funds, and then taking my engineering boot off and going into the finance world and finding out what are the bond rates at, what are the terms of that, where does that put us on bond payments, so then we can come back and inform, the council and the public. So yeah, there's still a lot of things in the air. We're at that pinch point where the actual engineering design is wrapping up, or the preliminary design is wrapping up, but there's still roundabout questions and infrastructure questions and obviously a lot of finance questions. And so we'll be hitting pencil to paper on that stuff, and I kind of left it open-ended here now as the year is closing out. I know we'll be back in front of you here sometime in the next month, giving you what we found and probably asking for some more feedback. But this is where it really gets aggressive as far as trying to figure out what it looks like for the bond. And so I'd appreciate if you guys want to come down, ask questions, be engaged, because there's a lot of things in the air, and I want to make sure that everybody here today, we're all on this, on the same page together. So if there's anything that you want to discuss, give me a call, give me a phone call. Let's talk this out, because we're working really hard, and I don't want to get too far down the line and then have some council members not comfortable with where we're going. So keep engaged.
Question?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, it might not be it's more of a finance question, so if you don't, I understand. If we, say we go to bond and it gets approved and goes through, and then we find that there's grants, does the grant money just pay towards that bond and then we paid the same amount? Like, how does that work?
What we are asking for the voters is to not exceed amount. So, and it's just like our SRF loans on our water plant and wastewater plant. It's, it would be weird, but we would say, hey, give us a bond for $20 million. And they voted and I said yes. And we got a grant and we got $10 million. So we're actually gonna only bond $10 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my question, thank you.
Well, thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation. Go ahead and move on to item B, shipping containers. Just continue discussion and possible direction regarding city code enforcement and potential amendments to the Lewiston City Code related to the prohibition of shipping containers as buildings in most zoning districts. Action item and Director Grow.
Yes. Here we go.
You're taking off with our books.
You can bring it back.
All right.
Leave the books.
Okay, thank you. So, look at him. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Council. Shannon Grove, Community Development Director. I've been here a few times to talk about shipping containers. This started back in June. Direction to staff in June was to work with the Planning and Zoning Commission and come up with zoning code amendments to allow shipping containers in the city. Since that time, there has been feedback from, or additional feedback, I should say, from the public, as there was today. And you have both sides of it. You have, please don't allow these, it affects our property valuations to allow them, and don't put any sidebars on them. So you have a spectrum of feedback on here. The memo that I submitted to you has 4 choices. And so what we would really like today is for the council to land on something. We will take it back and move forward. So briefly moving through the memorandum that I submitted in your packet, number 1 option is to take no action. What that would mean is that section 37-129 would remain. Shipping containers would be allowed, because they are currently, in the industrial, port, and airport zoning districts. They are not allowed in any other district with the exception of temporary uses in the C3, C4, and C6 zones for 90 days. Those are kind of hard to enforce because you don't necessarily know about them. And then if we did get a complaint on them, then we start the clock at that point. So it might be more than 90 days. But anyway, that's what the code is currently. If you take no action, then staff will just come back. There are quite a few shipping containers within the city. We would come back to you and just not necessarily get your blessing, but just lay out how we would enforce those, because it wouldn't happen in 1 week. We would have to go through and probably be pretty strategic about it. The second one, amend city code to allow the use of shipping containers in all zoning districts. This is the path that we somewhat went down a few months ago. Staff presented a alternative to a building permit, which was an exemption. We do that with ag buildings currently, and so we would treat it kind of like that. The reason why we would even do that is because we want to make sure that we know that what the uses of a shipping container would be, and also to inform what the setbacks would be, and allowance of where these would be in the side yards, front yards, and backyards. Option number 3, we briefly talked about this last time, and this is why I have the zoning map up. Amend city code to allow the use of shipping containers, not in all zoning districts, but in more than what are currently allowed. So there was some discussion last time about, well, what about Normal Hill? And some folks like to say orchard zones. Well, there's technically no orchard zones. You have R1, R2A, those are predominantly here. But you can also see that there are some in here as well. These gray ones, I'm gonna scan in a little bit here. You can see that we have Normal Hill zones, Normal Hill North and Normal Hill South. And these are the zones here and here, and it goes to about Southway Avenue. This is 21st Street. So this, essentially this, and then you can see here that you've got some, I can't see that part. R4 and C4, as well as downtown with the C5 and then the FIB zone further down here. Other than that, you have a myriad of zones. There are residential zones, but we also have mixed-use zones. Then you would have others that are in PUDs, R2A. They just allow for a lot of different things. Many of you have served on Planning and Zoning Commission and know that just because a use is labeled as residential doesn't necessarily mean that that is fully residential. One of the, I think part of the discussion last time also was that Normal Hill has a different character than other places within the city and oftentimes smaller lots. And so prohibiting them in Normal Hill would, you could make the argument that they're smaller lots and they would be more intrusive if you were to allow them in the Normal Hill area. Finally, number 4 would be amend city code to prohibit the use of shipping containers in all zoning. So currently, again, as in outlined in number 1, they are allowed in the industrial, port, and airport zoning districts, and temporarily in the commercial districts. So you do have the option to amend code to say no districts, if you would like. So again, staff's just looking to answer any questions you have, but also would very much appreciate the direction you want to go, so that we can move this forward and make any zoning change amendments or get going on the code enforcement.
Yes.
So, do we not have any way that we can, if someone, like for the 90 days, in order for them to put a shipping container on their property temporarily, that they come and get a permit so that we have a timeline of when it got placed on the property to when they need to remove it?
Currently, no.
And that's, can you do that? Is there a coding that?
Perhaps, yes. Yeah, we could look at doing something like that and require a permit. Part of the reason why they're not required to get a building permit is that they are not currently a building.
Right.
So there's not really functionality to do that. When we propose the ag building exemption, that kind of takes care of that. It's not a building permit, but it is somebody coming in and requesting that they use it for storage, and they're declaring that they're using it for storage and that they meet the proper setbacks.
Have you ever, sorry, follow up, have you ever seen codes where, in the perspective of homeowners not wanting to stare at a shipping container if their neighbor has one, having a privacy fence to be so much height in order to not see said shipping containers?
So we kind of talked about this last time with inoperable vehicles. It's not a sight obscuring fence, but it is, I can't remember the wording that's used on that. Joel, maybe you know. I brought my backup Joel today, Joel Plaskon, he's city planner. They are required in not to be seen from the street. So you could take that implication to say sight obscuring fence. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but yes, you can. If you were to go, like, for example, with the second option or the third option, you could say, we'd like you to bring back code that includes screening, such as a sight obscuring fence, and then staff would propose some code amendments for that.
So, speaking of the vehicle ordinance and the sight obscuring fence and whatnot, problem, I think, There's a problem in some neighborhoods, and we talked about it at some length. But, typical fence, 6 feet high, and that's it. Well, most of these containers are 8 foot by 8 foot wide, 20 feet long. So it's not quite a sight obscuring fence. And in order to make one, it has to be engineered if you're going over 6 feet. So you run into a much greater cost there. Just to point that out.
I'll let Kathy go.
Yes,
Thank you.
Counselor.
In taking no action, that would still leave some zones that allow. Okay,
Yes, industrial, port, and airport.
and I assume that all those approximately 200 containers that are in this city are not in those areas.
Yeah, they're spread out across the city.
So what do you do with those?
If you take no action, those remain. They can stay there.
So that's kind of like getting grandfathered in on something that we really don't want. If we made them non-conforming because they're not in the correct zone, could we then require that if there's any changes to it or if it's not being used appropriately as as what is designated that it can be used for, that it has to go?
Well, we would have to know, okay, let me just clarify. Are you saying if we allow them to be used as storage?
Correct.
And then we find out from a complaint that somebody is using it to live in?
Or something other than storage.
Yes, then would we enforce that? Currently, the code says they're not allowed at all. So we would, we would just go enforce them and say, even if you're using it for storage, these are no longer allowed, if you took no action. The industrial port and airport zoning, they don't become non-conforming, they're allowed there.
They're allowed there.
Yeah,
but I
if
mean
you don't
everything
want them
else.
allowed anywhere, then we would change the code to say they're not allowed anywhere, and we would then enforce that.
That's really difficult to do. I just thought if there was a period of time to make that change, it would be a little softer or something.
Well, we won't be able to enforce 200 in 1 week.
Understood.
Our code enforcement officers are really diligent, they're not that diligent.
But that's
And most
extreme.
likely, we would start probably in the Normal Hill area and then move to the other residential zones and then move to, we would take a stepped through approach on them.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
Thank you. Talking about Normal Hill and not being allowed in there because of the lot size, if it goes to that direction, I'm not a proponent of it, but I'm just asking the question, collect my thoughts again. If we would make it by lot size rather than zoning. Is that correct? Is that how that would be dealt with then if we?
That's not what I was talking about. I was just saying that in Normal Hill, you tend to have smaller lots.
Correct.
However, if you prohibited them by lot size, there would be lots in Normal Hill that could fit them, and there could be some that also could not fit them. And then that would apply across the city as well.
So that can be done, not by zoning, but by lot size.
Yes. The enforcement of them we would have to step through that quite a bit. It would take a while.
It just makes it, I think, more uniform to come that direction than to say, not in Normal Hill, but you can in the orchards. Because there's people in the orchards that don't want to look at them either. So I don't think that's really gonna make anybody happy. But if it's lot size, you can't hardly argue with that. That's how I see it. Instead of putting in a zoning, I would do it by lot size. That's all for now. Thank
Okay.
you.
Counselor?
I guess as a question to you, if it was a take no action, I think in the past years, the majority of the residents didn't even realize that they weren't allowed. You know, I didn't know it, you know, but if we took, now it's become very public. So do you think if we went with the no action to where it prohibited them from most residential areas, that it would just light up your office with complaints for, my neighbor's got one, have him take it out, you know?
I don't think so, just because we've been talking about this for 6 months and we haven't gotten a barrage of complaints. You know, part of the reason why we came to you about this was because this has been on the books for 30 years. Typically what staff does is, has the community changed in the last 30 years to say, well, because we haven't gotten a barrage of complaints about these, is it acceptable? And when we did our research, there were many cities within Idaho that do allow them. And so that's why we wanted to bring it to you, the policymakers, to say, is this something you want to consider? And if not, if you don't want to take any action, that's totally fine. Staff is just bringing this to you. You had a complaint come to you, and that's what kind of triggered this conversation. Sometimes what happens too, this is going to be no surprise, is that the city will get a complaint about, the person down the street from me, but I won't complain about the person next door to me. And that makes it hard too, because it's kind of a gotcha.
Yeah, Counselor?
So I am all in favor of option 2. I feel like if 200 people already have storage units, that means that they're in favor of them. And we have local businesses that provide nice storage units or shipping containers as their business. If we take that away from them, then that's, I don't feel like that's right for the business, although they should have known that that wasn't in code in turn. But I feel like that's the most fair option, especially if you're going through the applications and making sure that these people know, don't put it in the line of sight, it's not obstructing things that could cause accidents. Would we do that potentially with the existing ones, have them fill out the application and go through the same?
We would most likely, if you did allow them in all zoning districts, then we would most likely catch them on a kind of case-by-case basis. So for example, that happens with weed cases oftentimes, the code enforcement office gets a complaint, they're out there and they see this other one, and so it's not completely complaint-based. Some of it is initiated by our office as well. And so it would most likely be that way. If the council's direction was to go with number 2, most likely staff would come back and say, here's, based on feedback that we've gotten, here would be the recommended sideboards for that.
So, last time we talked about, when they were talking about Normal Hill currently has some kind of a building code that doesn't allow something to be past the front of the structure or something like that? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's in the overlay area.
So to me, to approve or to support the number 2 option of allowing it, I would support it if it had that in the write-up. If it was very strict where they could put them.
Such as rear yards and side yards, but not front yards? Okay, sometimes, yes, we can take a look at that. What gets hard is when they are on corner lots, or you don't have your, fully just lot surrounded by other houses. So we can take a look at that and give you examples of when that would work and when that might not fill your intent.
Council President. Can you describe again what the definition for shipping container was? Was it just 4 metal walls? I can't remember how you guys.
It is shipping container. I think it says oceanic container, something like that in the code. Do you remember, Joel?
No.
I would have to look it up on code.
So my question, why I'm leading to that is what about like sheds, you know, like those, cause you have those really nice sheds that have like roofs and everything. What would if they said, okay, we can't have a shipping container, but they still need storage, what if they wanted to go that route? But now it's not just big hunky material, metal shipping container, but it's actually somewhat of a structure.
Yeah, those are accessory buildings. People do them all the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't lie within this
No.
at all?
No. These are specifically shipping containers, the open, top, metal,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. That's
Yeah.
what I thought, but I wasn't.
Yeah, no, accessory buildings are allowed, and they do have sideboards on them, and that's, I think, what we were talking about last time with Normal Hill, is that there are some exceptions to putting them in the front yards on Normal Hill.
I don't know, it's hard, because to me, at least, they still have the option to put those types of buildings on their property, so it's not like they're stuck without another alternative to have a storage area, if that's, you know, what we're really centering around, is that they could have a storage area. And so, I don't really see why we have to go with shipping containers if they have other alternatives they could go with. Now, if they didn't have any options, and we were trying to give them storage options, I understand the shipping containers, but they still have other options that would be more appealing to the city as far as looks go. I don't know if I'm the only one this is where my hesitancy is, I guess I should say. Or just a comment, sorry, wasn't a question.
Counselor Klein, you were recommending option 2. You want to make that in a form of motion that we can vote on to have staff bring us back something?
I move to select option 2 to amend the city code to allow the use of shipping containers in all zoning districts.
We want some special instructions?
No, we started working on that already. So what we were proposing was to do the exemption like ag buildings to have a process. And so we will most likely continue on that vein.
Do you have to wait for a second to ask questions, or is that not needed?
No, she's made a motion. For discussion's sake, I'll second it. So.
Okay. If we do go with this too, and it is agreed upon, we then go back to what we want this to look like, right? As far as restrictions go, where it sits back, how that would work.
I think Joel will answer your question.
So if you select option 2 from the memo you're referring to that was in the packet, that brings us back to where we already started. That process already began. We had drafted a code amendment to strike the prohibition from the code and explicitly include shipping containers in the definition of building. That would effectively allow them in all zoning districts, subject to building permit requirements based on the building code. That went to hearing at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they recommended approval of it already. So we would just pick that process up and now just schedule that hearing on that same draft ordinance in front of City Council.
So we could still make amendments to the code though?
Correct.
As a council if we choose.
Correct.
Clear on that?
Okay.
Okay, we'll call for a vote.
Yes,
Vote,
please
vote,
do.
vote.
Yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. So 4 in favor, 1 opposed. Thank you. We'll see what it looks like. Hi. This is our next item of discussion, opioid Settlement Funding Task Force. It's a presentation on the establishment of a task force and grant program for opioid settlement fund allocation. And this is an action item. Grant Manager Rose.
Good afternoon, President and Council. So I bring for you what we have progressed with the opioid funding. As you know, we have opioid settlement funding that we've been in discussion of how to utilize that funding. And so currently we have $484,000 in our coffers for that program. We will be getting over $1 million in the next 18 years of this funding. So to maximize the impact of the funding and align with this intended purposes, a grant program was identified as the most effective approach. A task force has been assembled, bringing the Chaz Health, Public Health, Office of Corrections, St. Joseph, and the UGM, just representatives from those entities to kind of discuss the use of the funding and how the best way to get it out into the hands of the public to manage this crisis. So this task force will evaluate, they have been helping me pull together the program, put in input on what those applications would look like, and what the notice of funding opportunity would look like, and the best way to evaluate the applications and select the programs for it to go for. So the platform is going to be the Neighborly program, which we already use for the CDBG program. So everybody's real familiar with that program and that process. Eligible entities would be those providing the allowable services as identified in the Attorney General's Exhibit A. And this graphic kind of summarizes what those uses are that we can use that funding for. With the city is also would be an eligible applicant if the police department had a project or the resource officer had a project, then they could put together a program, an application, and then we would allocate those fundings towards that project. So the proposed dates are January 1st to open up that application portal and receive applications through the end of February. Review them during the month of March and announce those selected projects at the end of March so that projects can begin in April. I've been working with the public information officer to do some outreach, a website, and maybe some radio clips type of thing. So is there any questions I can answer?
Have any questions?
And I might have missed it here, I was trying to read this, and I can't read and listen at the same time. Did you say what type of individuals or companies would be applying for this?
So we would expect nonprofits, not necessarily individuals. We would expect those entities that have established projects and programs where they could manage the funding. So if there's a nonprofit that is doing some kind of education for opioid, they would be eligible.
Yes.
I see, okay, so you have Union Gospel on here.
Yes.
I'm just kind of curious, because they don't, if I remember correctly, their restrictions are they don't take anybody that's under substance. Is it,
And so
how do they provide that
our
then?
thoughts of including them, and that's just for input on this program, is that they would be helping doing the education dissemination.
Okay.
They are faced with the crisis, and so I think they give input from that perspective.
Okay, so basically giving them, I don't know, pamphlets and paperwork that they can do to advocate for the risk of it and dangers and stuff.
And also, forwarding them on to other services. UGM would be aware of other services that were available that they would be able to detour them to or.
Okay, thank you. I did have an individual reach out about wanting to participate to help with that. And I was given the requirements and I gave it to them, but they never got back to me, so. I don't know what happened there, but I do know that I had read through, you guys have some requirements that people can utilize these funds if they meet those requirements, so.
Yes.
That's a good layout, so thank you for laying that out effectively.
Anything further? Jennifer, do we take action?
There's no action.
There is no action. I
Particular one.
just wanted to bring it to your attention
Oh,
and
okay.
if you had any other suggestions or input.
Thank you very much for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to item D, engineering development code updates. Looks like a very exciting topic for Dustin.
There we go. Tuck it in here. Okay, so I guess the one primer would be, I think the shipping containers were a good example of something that was in the code. Maybe the public and staff and council weren't aware of all the details in it. And so when I hear something, we try to bring it to you so you get a better understanding of what staff is facing on a daily basis. And so this is one where you hear a lot of rumblings in the public about how difficult the city of Lewiston is to deal with and how nobody wants to do business anywhere here. And so I'm here to tell you what we try to do to get businesses to come here and invest in our community. There's also, as is with anything in the world, there's layers in it and there's some complications. And so I want to talk to you a little bit, some of the challenges that we've come across on the development code that is currently written. So why are we here? We're just going to discuss kind of some competing interests in what we have adopted by, well, a federally mandated ADA transition plan versus working on encouraging growth and development within Lewiston. I've got some specific examples, as specific properties and specific code examples, and then really kind of a timeline moving forward, but it starts here with this group, getting feedback on what you would be supportive of. And we're not really gonna get into specifics. I mean, we can get as specific as you want, but generalities help us point this ship in the right direction. So I referenced the ADA transition plan that was adopted in 2020. All local governments are required to have an ADA transition plan. And so the transition plan is a broad, everything from the city website, our city facilities, but for the purpose of today, we're talking about specifically the rights of way, our public streets. And this is, everything from the beeper you pushed across the street. You can see the example there of the yellow ped ramps, the truncated domes is what those are called. So you can feel those with the stick. We want to make sure the grades are correct, that the sidewalks are adequately wide and not too steep. All of those things are all part of what we want to do, the infrastructure we want to provide to the traveling public that may not have the accessibility that we all have, or everybody, that we want to make sure that everybody can get to where they're going within the right of way. The transition plan, is, as I said, it's federally mandated, and it is basically a plan that we say that we're going to enact. I provide you an update. I think I actually gave you the update for 23 just in our last meeting. So we're a little behind on the plan, or at least just getting 23 buttoned up. But every year we evaluate what we've done. And as I said, there's other components to it, but we look at where the city and private development has invested in our rights of way and have improved that, that frontage, the sidewalk, the ramps, the signals, the lighting. What have we done? And we identify goals. We identify where we want to reach, what we've invested in the infrastructure, what private development has invested in the infrastructure, and where we want to take that. And so, that's directly from the transition plan, that table right there, but basically says, we're gonna adopt a plan, we're gonna do what we're gonna say we're gonna do. One key component within that transition plan was identifying priority routes, and the only reason I throw this in there is it wasn't willy-nilly. You can see these routes are all very familiar routes that you've seen and drive through every single day. In fact, on your way home today, you'll probably hit 3 or 4 of these. They're all arterials or collectors. So, and they're all in corridors where you're gonna have a school or maybe some commercial properties connecting neighborhoods. And so that's where the city has put a lot of emphasis on investing in our ADA transition plan and our projects. So now transitioning away from, that's one bookend where we talk about the city is going to make it a priority to address all of these public rights of way. And so now we're gonna talk about what defines these frontage improvements. And so chapter 31 of the city code is the public right of way. Specifically, they're not chapters, but section 46 through 52 identifies the responsibility of these frontage improvements. And so, to get it right out of the gate, I hear this all the time. The sidewalk is the responsibility of the property owner. It's in the code, it's all across the board. It's not just Lewiston. It has been adopted in every community I've ever worked in, lived in, been around, that basically everything back of the curb is the responsibility of the property owner. I know it's in the right of way, but that is how it's been longstanding, that, that it is in the right of way. So you'll oftentimes see, like we just talked about the Main Street project, that sidewalk can be covered as a project cost carried by the city. It is the city's right to maintain it, but we've said is the jurisdiction, or it's the responsibility of the property owner to maintain it. So in the winter, that's snow removal. If you have trees and you have the sidewalk panels pop out and they're a trip hazard, to repair those, or if the sidewalk's just now 150 years old and it's just worn out, the city has the right to order that sidewalk in of the property owner. So that is how the code is written, and that is how almost every jurisdiction that I am aware of operates. And that's what's called out in all this chapter 31. So now we're talking about what happens when somebody comes in and says, I want to invest in this property. I want to bring a business, or I want to do a whatever. Big investment in private property. It can be new development and construction. So what triggers the consideration of new construction? So if we classify you as new construction, you're going to trigger the requirement for frontage improvements. And so that's kind of question number 1 today, is generally, where do you feel that we should require frontage improvements? So if your case in point would be the new hotel that's going in up on Nez First Grade, I would say that's a couple $1 million investment, private investment, a couple $1,000s in sidewalk that is the responsibility of the property owner, is probably a viable requirement to say, please put in the necessary and frontage improvements so people can access your business. If you're a retired person who is gonna replace a front bay window, you're in an overlay district, and you're getting a permit for it, probably not a reason that you would require, the city would require you gotta fix that panel right there, or replace your whole sidewalk. So trying to find the bookend where it's saying, you have a heavy investment in this development versus you're putting a new deck on, or you're putting windows in, or we're gonna paint the house, so we're gonna get you. That's not what we're looking for. We're trying to find that middle ground where, okay, you've invested enough in your property, you have some non-compliant ADA ped ramps, we're gonna require you to do that frontage improvements. Question, are there exceptions? Yeah, there is. They're not great. So there is something called fee in lieu of sidewalk, and it's written in the code. And fee in lieu of sidewalk means you live somewhere off, it's not an arterial, it's a neighborhood street, and you're doing some investment on the property, and you trigger, it's been deemed, it's new construction, and you look at the frontage, there's not sidewalk on that block, there's no sidewalk on that street, it would not connect anything, it's gonna create bird baths. We would like for FILO, we call it FILO, to be used for that. And so that's something that was written in the code long before I got here that says the city will collect a fee in lieu of, and so the city takes that money and invests it on a more important route than that neighborhood street. That property owner will never be required to do any frontage improvements because they paid their share. The city just said, we're gonna take that and we're gonna invest it somewhere else where we're gonna get way more use out of those dollars to get people connected to where they wanna go into the FILO. So we run a FILO program, and so we use that's part of our budget annually. The problem with the FILO program is the language in the code is currently very restrictive. Like I said, it can't be an arterial, but it says and. So by the time you run all those ands in, you say, well, there's really nowhere in Lewiston that actually checks those boxes. So it's a great program, but it gives us limited flexibility in how we can implement it. So I see some eyeballs. Is there any questions before we move to the next?
So, like, for instance, I know a couple of people have talked about wanting to like build a shop, and they're like, in the backyard, and they're like, oh, you need to put a sidewalk. Why do you need a sidewalk next to your shop in the backyard?
I have a good slide on that.
So, I mean, I think that this kind of, it seems like you're heading that direction, so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good way.
Okay, yeah, I do have a perfect example of that I'll show.
Okay.
In fact, we're already there. And so I grabbed about a half a dozen just examples around town that we've faced, and I'll quickly walk through. This is Thane right here. And so there's no sidewalk on this block. This is, I think the roundabout's down here, or pretty close to there. This application came in and they wanted to put a sign board up, one of those, just a electronic sign. There would be a lot of what times we look at what could be considered new construction would be, are you bringing in more traffic? And so if the intensity of the use is gonna be greater and we're gonna have people coming and going, that you could straight face and say, yeah, you're gonna impact that neighborhood. You should put perimeter sidewalks or drive access into it. That doesn't pass that because it's just a signboard. So it's not gonna be something there that's gonna impact that neighborhood. But they would, if you considered this new construction, you've got frontage on Thane, you got frontage on the side, I can't remember which side street this is. Alder. So that immediately for a signboard, electronic signboard, that kills that project. And as we do all of this, my question, and a question for you is, if not now, then when? So if you're not gonna require it with a signboard, then when would it be? And I'm not saying, and I don't mean that to be an accusatory, I'm not gonna, you just really when, as this development, and, there's no sidewalk on the other side, there's no connecting sidewalk on Alder or further down Thane, so maybe that's a more appropriate project for the city to come in when we do any re-improvements on Thane, that would be more there, more available there.
Sorry, are you saying on this current lot or this project that they are being proposed to have to put sidewalks in?
We deemed, for this particular example, for this applicant, we said that was not new construction.
Okay.
But
It's
the
not
code
written.
is not really clear in that what is new construction, and so we would say no. But the risk with that now, if you're going back to the ADA transition plan, would be, so they put the electronic signboard up there, they're not required to do any frontage improvements, so that signboard stays there for 20 years, you're left with a void in the sidewalk program, or in that sidewalk, in that network. So if not now, then when? So, we would have to follow up down the line somewhere, but I'm also saying, do you really want to kill a project because you want 100% compliance in that? So there's some tools I talk about in a little bit. So here's another one. We're talking about topography. Lewiston is obviously not a flat town. So you have a lot of hills, you have a lot of rivers, creeks, you have a lot of areas where sidewalk it's gonna be a challenge. There is nothing in the code that says, due to natural topography, you get an exemption. There's nothing in there. And so this was one we got a redevelopment out on Hatway Road. The picture doesn't quite do it justice, but it is a cliff. So in order to require those frontage improvements, you can do them. Money solves everything. So somebody would have to come back there, pull that slope back, put a retaining wall to put a sidewalk that doesn't connect to anywhere. And I don't think that achieves anybody's goals. And so one quick, easy fix would be that, we have a provision in there that allows somebody, whether it's you or me or staff, to say that is not an appropriate location for a standard location sidewalk.
Would that just look like you would just say, like, looking at it, you'd be like, there's just no way, or would we put some kind of measurements of like, if the slope is this much, or?
Typically, what we've done is at the discretion of the public works director or the city engineer. And in that, at the discretion of staff, there's always an appeal process. So if somebody said, and I looked at it and I said, no, I think you can get a sidewalk in there, they could appeal it and that would appeal to the council. I mean, that's how it's worked in other jurisdictions. Because I think that's the other part of the conversation I want to have is giving staff some latitude to make some determinations like that saves time. Because I don't think council wants to hear 2 or 3 of these a month or every week or whatever to say, this one's not appropriate, this isn't, so eventually we'll get the rub where somebody's adamant that that's cost prohibitive and I can't do it. And really, cost prohibitive is not actually a provision that we want to, because somebody could just say, that sidewalk's expensive, I don't want to build it, versus something that's just not, it does not make economic sense, it does not make construction sense to go out and do that. So we would have to set parameters as to why, and usually we don't let cost be part of it. It's not feasible to build a sidewalk in that location.
Councilor Schroeder?
Thank you. And I totally agree with you, and I think the decisions that you're making make good sense from the standpoint of what you're talking about. But how is all of this related to the ADA goals?
The ADA goals are that we want to we want to take, I don't want to say every opportunity, but we want to take those opportunities to require sidewalk. And so since the frontage improvements are the responsibility of the property owner, we would require, and so that's that one bookend to say, any construction is gonna do all the frontage improvements, and that doesn't make sense. And so we gotta find that sweet spot between where we would require all of the frontage improvements versus we wouldn't require any frontage
So
improvements.
this is all still related to the ADA that
Yes,
we started
yes,
out with.
yep,
I cut it.
Yep, sorry.
Felt like
I wanted to kind of point the way the code's written and the way,
Right.
what the direction that we were provided with the ADA transition plan.
And I think you're making good decisions, and I support what you're doing, and you think outside the box, and I appreciate that.
That's our goal.
Okay. I might have to leave, and it's not because of your,
I don't take anything personally.
okay, good, thank you.
So this is, and the next of these are somewhat similar. And so there's a couple of other tools in our, possible, that we can use is a postponement. Postponement, so this would be another property, you can see up to the, these properties back to Richardson. And so any improvements to any of these lots would trigger frontage improvements to Richardson. And, you can look at the topo lines here that it's a gully, it's not really, nobody would get use out of it necessarily at the current, where everything is at right now. One provision that could be considered is what's called a postponement agreement. And so the postponement agreement says, as the property owner, I am not saying I won't participate in potential frontage improvements. I'm just saying now is not the time. And so a lot of times the city says it does says in the code that a postponement can be granted if the city feels like there's gonna be undue harm to, like, drainage issues. So we're gonna build a giant road that ends at a hill and it's just gonna shoot the stormwater off and damage other property. That's not, I mean, that is a good provision, but it's not, I don't think it's out there. I mean, I think we need to use, this would be one where somebody could say, yeah, it's not hurting anything, just build it. It wouldn't qualify for a postponement, but a postponement says, I will build it at a later date. I will participate however we do. And I think Phil earlier talked about a local improvement district. And a lot of times, this is great where we get postponements and the neighborhood understands as growth kind of surrounds this area, that they will participate in some form, of their frontage improvements, but the city can come in and do a local improvement district, the city leads the project, and then based off of frontage, the costs are allocated to the lots that are abutting it.
That dies with the person that sells it though, right?
No, that stays with the property.
It
That
does?
is recorded with the deed,
Okay.
or the property. Yeah. Yeah, the city had a robust program. I think in the 80s or 90s. And it intended to do that, but unfortunately the documents weren't recorded, I don't think, or Chris Davies before me tried to revive it, and it was questionable about whether those things could be applied. And so those have gone away. But I think, you can record these and do them in a manner that, gets the job done. This is the one you were talking about generally. So again, Thane, so little shop right here, and there is frontage improvements on Thane. They have all the frontage improvements, but by code, they've got, again, not looking at the sides, Airway and 11th, would be required. So anything that would trigger new construction would trigger, Airway and 11th. And so one last final tool that we could use is basically a development agreement. So it makes sense. If you're just utilizing this and you're investing your property that's fronting on Thane, you could come in and say, this would be phase 1 and this would be phase 2. At a later date, I will agree. I mean, it's the property owner's responsibility would be to do those frontage improvements. But at this point, I don't envision me using those or needing those. So the city would engage with property owner and come up with a development agreement and say, we're gonna do this, and then any other triggers beyond that, we would do the frontage improvements with those back areas. And you would have provisions where no new accesses, because if you're gonna access it, you need to have the frontage improvements on there. But I think that's a amenable way for helping the city to promote. We're not gonna hold you to do all of this. We just want the part that's gonna be utilized.
So if we, say we didn't do this, right, and we just build your building, we're not gonna require you to put sidewalks in. Can the city not then put sidewalks in ourselves? Does it then become some kind of muddy area there?
The city can order them in, which I've never done, but it is in the code and it's not a popular choice. The city can there are times we have not done that where somebody comes in and we just do where we put sidewalks in for them. There's been times when a development happens next door and it kind of creates an issue where it doesn't transition and tie into existing sidewalk, and the neighbor didn't do any development. So we'll just tie that in, like we did it in front of Rogers Toyota, did some work, and we did some transition on 21st Street 2 or 3 years ago. But we typically don't we have some ADA transition plan money for specific uses where a new bus stop and we can't get to it. So we just tie in little portions of it, but we don't typically do any work for private property.
So like industrial property maybe, but not private, or is that the same?
It's the same. Any improvements within the right of way.
Because I guess where my brain's at is like, if we had, say, a business come in and they could bring potential really good revenue to the city, and we're trying to be business friendly, and we're like, no, you have to do this, and we potentially lose a good business that could be economic development.
I mean,
Where do we draw the line?
yeah, I mean, that's, again, I think I said it last week, that the council sets the budgets. I have had in Public Works, we had 2 pots of money, $10,000 a piece, for doing those, like I said, those transition pieces. Sidewalks, not as cheap as it used to be, which is pretty much everything is not as cheap as it used to be, but we don't have a large budget for things like that. If the city and council wanted to set aside money for that, I mean, that would be something you could consider.
Okay, thank you.
This is another one. This is out. So this is Ripon where it transitions to Bar Road. So this is Ripon up here and then goes down to Bar Road. This property, you can see it's stuck out. It sticks out pretty well because you go down the hill there and you can see it's on the hillside there. And I can't remember the name of this little street. You don't even know it's a street. Oh, it's Hemlock. Hemlock kind of dies right here, but the right-of-way keeps going all the way down to Bar Road. So I've met with, I can't remember, at least 5, maybe 6 people in the 5 years I've been here to talk about, building a house here or whatever it is. And the frontage improvements are just outrageous for Bar Road and Hemlock. And Bar Road doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it doesn't have any sidewalk there. So again, another, possibility where we maybe consider a development agreement or postponement, or something where we have a little bit more flexibility to say, it doesn't make sense to require sidewalk frontage for Bar Road, but the code does not allow staff to make those changes. Here's another one. This is up here at All Saints, just a large parcel. A lot of times, and I'll say, a lot of times, all of these issues are addressed with subdivision. So subdivision, you dedicate the right of way, you build the streets, you build the water, sewer, and all of that other stuff. This would be easier if they just subdivided this lot and then came up with a development plan. But again, if they wanted to do one little, and I think we've had some talks with them, we're just gonna put a little building here. Well, you've now triggered all these frontage improvements unless you subdivide that out. So again, development agreement, postponement, where we talk about what are you impacting? How are you, talking about right away? What are you impacting? Where's your ingress? Where's your egress? Who's coming? Who's going? Let's talk about how we can make this more efficient for both the city and the developer. Nope, we got one more. Last one. Real quick, same thing. Development. So this is 22nd and Powers, an infill project. But again, it's on the corner. So Powers, 22nd, there's no sidewalk up there. I mean, there's a little bit of sidewalk. This is up by Greco stuff, 23rd's down here. So you're starting to see more infill on the other side of the street, but there's no sidewalk on Powers up here. And same deal. We talk about, this is a perfect one for postponement where, I think the property owner should probably be vested, everybody, we talked about Normal Hill tonight. Everybody at some point participated in the construction of those sidewalks. They paid for that. And so, new development's no different. They should probably pay their fair share to get into the system. But for this one, I don't know that it's the right time for that. All right, so how do we fix all this? Again, any feedback that we can get from you to say, I'm more comfortable leaning more towards the ADA transition plan and requiring it, or I want to see more opportunities for staff to get out there. I think code in your packet today was kind of the staff's first blush at clearing up some of that, some of those things. So like we've removed the ands with the ors. There's some areas that we allow us to deem something topographically infeasible for construction. So that first knock at the code was in your packet. We're amenable to any changes. That was just, we had to start somewhere. And so, yeah, updating FILO, updating postponements, creating the development agreements. Development agreements would always come to council. Staff cannot enter into any agreement. So in the event that we needed to have those, they would come to council.
I guess for me, your proposed changes make perfect sense. I
Okay.
support it.
Okay. So,
I do have a question though.
yep.
What does this do, I'm totally on board, I just what does this do for legal wise? Like, what kind of waters does this put us in with legal, or is this a lot of practices that cities do and it's?
These are all standard practices. In communities that are, maybe growing fast, you took it, Treasure Valley, you have just it's the fast pace that's going so quickly. And so if you don't have that flexibility, you really paint yourself in a corner. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where we're trying to, open that up a little bit more in there. I lost my train of thought, but so the questions that were in there, it sounds like Councilor Spiegelmeier already said, if you're amenable to allow us to use these alternatives for construction. Oh, what I wanted to say was, if you said, no, I don't want to restrict anybody, and so changing it where we were going to not require people to do the frontage improvements, that would be a huge impact, because now the city takes responsibility for, I don't know, how many hundreds and thousands of square feet of sidewalk. So that would be a huge dramatic shift. But everything that we've discussed to this point is not a big shift, just trying to, like I said, open it up a little bit more.
I'm totally on board with it. I think it's great. And, we talked about when, some of us, I know running on council, getting rid of that red tape, right, for businesses and developers trying to come in, homeowners who want to make improvements and not holding them to so much restriction. So I think this is going in the right direction.
Okay. And then a balance between pro-development and accomplishing the frontage improvements. So,
Yeah. not one way or the other too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't need to belabor this anymore. It sounds like everybody's kind of supportive of the direction staff's going. What we're gonna do from here is obviously start the conversation today. Two advisory commissions I want to take this in front of, Public Works Advisory Commission, but mostly the Disability Advisory Commission, because I think that's where they'll kind of keep us in check to say, because they've had a lot, I mean, since I've been here, we've had a lot of conversations about what triggers, what's considered new construction. And so what I'm trying to get away from is where we're asking staff, because the way it's kind of interpreted now is a dollar amount or percentage, if you're investing a certain percentage of the value of the building. And I don't know anything about building construction. I keep my stuff in the roads and the water and sewer. And so you're asking engineering staff to, vet out developers to say, the hotel across the street here. Yeah, is that $32 million? Is that $14 million? And so you get into this really gray area where we're asking for improvements and they're pushing back. I want to get away from that, where we can look at it and say, yep, that's going to trigger frontage improvements because you've got X, Y, and Z, instead of trying to negotiate what a dollar amount would be.
So are we saying like if the project's bigger and more money putting in the pocket, then we kind of, we're gonna have you.
Well, you could say, somebody wants to reinvest in Kmart, and that's a bigger building, and its value is probably pretty high. And so we're gonna put $2 million in Kmart because it's under that 40% or 50% threshold, but somebody's gonna basically scrape off and do a bigger investment, but a smaller portion of a building that's valued less. So you get into this, like, is your appraised value too high? Is it too low? You're trying to skirt underneath this, and conveniently, it's always like, oh, no, I'm only doing 48.9% of construction, so I don't have to do the frontage improvements.
Kind of an unfair thing that we
It sets staff up to have to be the bully to say, no, I don't believe your cost estimate. So, and we're not in a position to have that conversation because that's not our role. We're actually, the code that is provided goes to the uniform or International Building Code, and they've got it into tiers. And so I think this would be tier 3, which would identify basically if we're taking it down to the studs and we're doing X, Y, and Z, and it's very clear, fire and building understand what that means. And if it triggers that, boom, we don't have to negotiate, or we don't have to go back and forth with a developer of what is new construction.
It's typically been set at 50% of the value of the
Yep.
building, so, you have a loss and you're gonna go ahead and restore it, but you'd be putting more than 50% of what the building is worth into your, remodel or repair. That's what triggers it. And I agree with Dustin. I mean, you guys aren't assessors or appraisers, and
A case in point, and I'm hesitant to bring it up, but the Boys and Girls Club was one that it was a high school, so it was never really appraised like it maybe, like a private development. And they came in and the feedback I got, it wasn't a positive experience because they felt like the city following the code as they should, created kind of a friction that we don't want. We want people to feel like it's predictable. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna do this investment, and this is what I'm gonna have to do for improvements. So, long story short, we're gonna take it to the PWAC, we're gonna take it to the DAC. Once we get it compiled enough to the point where we feel like we're getting in the right direction, we're gonna have legal make sure that we're not getting coloring outside the lines, and then we'll bring it back to you. So this will take a couple months because those advisory commissions only meet once a month, so it's gonna take me a little while. So I'll probably see you all in the late spring.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dustin. Okay. So we'll move on to the signed building fund update. Director Gordon.
Good afternoon, Amy Gordon, City Treasurer. So this afternoon, I am bringing an update at Council's request of the Building Reserve Fund. I think specifically the request was an update of fiscal year '24 and the current year, fiscal year '25. So on this first slide, what I have provided Council is just what the city code defines this fund as. This is an account that was established in city code, and it was established for constructing or remodeling city-owned buildings and properties and on-site and off-site infrastructure needs for such buildings and properties. In fiscal year 2024, this was the first year that council eliminated the funding for the account. So there's no longer money going into it. It just retains what was funded in prior years, less what's been spent. At the time you wrote the 2024 budget, we had estimated that there would be approximately 6.4 million left in that fund. So what we did is we fully appropriated the funds so that council would have the ability to award projects on an as needed or as opportunities arose. And the narrative we put into the budget was exactly what city code says for those funds. So we didn't define any projects. We just appropriated the full amount that was estimated at the time to be in that account with what the city code says for those funds. Shortly before fiscal year 2024 started, the facilities manager came to city council and they made a request for these projects listed to the right. The total of those projects added up to that were estimated at the time the request was made was $144,000. Listed down below in the white section is what was actually spent on those projects. I have noted above on the truck bay abatement, it's got an asterisk. That is because that ended up getting combined with a bigger project that was approved by council just a few months later. So there was 144 approved on these 5 projects and 101,000 was spent. In December, the facilities manager came back and made a request for the deferred maintenance items that are listed there to the right. And council approved these projects with within their motion not to exceed $775,000. So at the time, these projects all added up to just a few thousand below that amount. And down below, we have listed what was spent to date on those projects and the status of those projects. So of those projects, there are 2 remaining. The library lighting project just got started. And the City Hall windows project has not yet been started. And I apologize, but I don't have the status of if the expectation of that project will happen, if maybe there is not going to be enough budget left for that project, but that's currently not been started at all. No procurement, nothing on it. And then in March, there was a request from the mayor to City Council to use the funds for the feasibility study related to a consolidation study. The total approved projects in fiscal year 24, including those that were approved in August of 2023, was $974,000 was approved on projects. We have spent $592,000 on those projects to date. And there are the 2 projects remaining with the City Hall windows and the library lighting project that have an estimated amount of $380,000. So if we look at it on a cumulative total, what council has approved for dollars to be spent from that fund and what has been spent to date, plus what's left in the 2 projects, but as estimated, we are pretty much on point with what council's approved for spending and what has been spent.
With the library lighting, wasn't there a grant that was put towards that?
There is, I don't know if it's a grant, but there are lighting rebates that would be available. Yes, it is a grant, but we would still spend the money and then the revenue, when it's received back, will go back into this fund. But we still have to spend the amount to recognize that full expense. So the actual balance of the assigned building fund at the beginning of 2024 was $6,451,000. We spent the $592,000. So at the end of October, or at the end of fiscal year 2024, we had a balance of 5.8 million, with 380,000 estimated to still be spent on the projects as approved by council prior to during fiscal year 2024. So with fiscal year 2025, again, we have no funding for the account. We estimated at the time we were writing the 2025 budget that there would be 5.3 million left in that account. And we did not define how the money was going to be spent. We didn't define any projects. We just left it fully appropriated with the same language as what was in fiscal year 2024. And at this time, nobody's come before council and made any additional requests. So at this point, as the fund stands, there's approximately 5.3 million left in the account.
So I guess my reasoning for requesting this update was more of a, appreciate it, it's good, was with Director Barker being gone, I think Director Groh is sitting in, I don't know what, but we're well into the first quarter and we haven't had any requests. And last year we had a big report that we had $10 million in deferred maintenance. Where are we going?
Yeah, and I'm not the right director to speak on that. I mean, I know one of the things we are looking at potentially consolidating some buildings so that they maybe don't want to move too much on those buildings and deferred maintenance in those areas, but I can't speak to that.
And that's kind of what I was wanting to hear.
Okay.
You know, which one of those we're holding off on, and are we gonna move forward? Is all the fire department buildings done? Yeah.
So, and as I mentioned, we have one project in progress, another project still yet to come. So you get too many on your slate board at one time, it's just hard to organize and get anything accomplished on those. I was actually quite surprised by the progress that they made on the projects that have already been approved. I did forget to mention, when in probably 2022, 2023, when we had the estimates for the fire station, we had put community parks on the back burner. They have a phase up at community park that they have yet to finish. It's where the fitness equipment will go and the basketball courts. So that's still also on the back burner that will at some point probably be presented to council to finish that phase out. It's on the back burner currently because the Parks Department is working on the conversion for the community park. So they'll get that done and then they will likely come back before council and request to finish that phase out, the phase that was already started. There where the bathroom, the parking lots are at, there is also the space for the fitness equipment that was purchased and then the basketball courts. So that's something that will potentially come before council in the next year or two.
Further questions?
I did have another one.
Yeah.
And I guess if we didn't ask the chief, I'm curious, would you mind kind of letting us know what you think we still have, not cost-wise, but to do with the fire stations?
Good evening, Greg Reitmeyer, Fire Chief. The rough order of magnitude that was completed by the engineering, it was part of the first phase that was done in the diesel particulate, was right in that $4.5 million range of what's left to do to get the buildings. I hate to kick the can down the road. I like what we did on 21st. We're gonna strategically pick it up and put it down the road to a future date, as we did with the overlay on 21st. We bought 10 years by doing something, and I think we don't have the funding to, go out and spend $30 or $40 million on the two new stations where they need to be built for the future of our city and a training center. But I think we can make the facility safer. And I gave a report to you last month about where we were at, and I've worked with the mayor. I'll anticipate coming out in January to work with you again on taking what the engineers recommended and what that would look like for the council.
Anything further?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, Well, let's move on to unfinished new business. City councilor comments. Do we have any this evening? Councilor.
I just wanted to send my condolences to, the family of Stephanie Lynn Rudy and her husband. They had her memorial this last Saturday. I was unable to attend, I was out of town, but, I'm sure it was a good turnout and lots of love and care. And so, my prayers go out to the family and those that were affected by losing, her. I can't imagine the pain that they're in right now, and so I just wanted to extend my heartfelt prayers out to those that are suffering in those times of need.
Anybody else? Any city boards and commissions, liaison updates? Do we have any updates tonight? Yeah, I don't have any.
Eating a lot.
Mayor comments, well, he's not here. Agenda topics, do you have any we want to bring up?
I wanted to go back to Spickelmeyer's request of having them come back with what is left on the needed maintenance updates for our buildings. I'd like to see what we've checked off and what we have left over, just to kind of see where we're at. Because, yeah, we might move to the consolidation, but we might not, and then we still have buildings that need repairs. So I'd like an update specifically to that, to what we have left over and what we still need to action in the future.
Is that in the form of a motion?
Yes. Do you want to make it better? More clear?
Did you get that?
I got it. Okay. Do I need to pick a date? I don't remember if it.
Got a
We just say
second?
the-
Second.
We have a second. So motion's made by Councilor Forsman and seconded by Spickelmeyer. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll squeeze that in on a future agenda. Anything else? It's that magic time. Got a motion for adjournment?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.